Okay, so we're gonna read this last page. You can just follow along in your book. It says, they were in the beginnings of the thick forest, plunking with weary feet on a track when they heard the noises, squeakings, and the hard strike of hoofs on a path. As they pushed forward, the squeaking increased till it became a frenzy. They found a piglet caught in a curtain of creepers, throwing itself at the elastic traces in all the madness of extreme terror. Its voice was thin, needle sharp, and insistent. The three boys rushed forward, and Jack drew his knife again with a flourish. He raised his arm in the air, then came a pause, a hiatus. The pig continued to scream, and the creepers to jerk, and the blade continued to flash at the end of a bony arm. The pause was only long enough for them to understand what an enormity the downward stroke would be. Then the piglet tore loose from the creepers and scurried into the undergrowth. They were left looking at each other in the place of terror. Jack's face was white under the freckles. He noticed that he still held the knife aloft and brought his arm down, replacing the blade in the sheath. Then they all three laughed ashamedly and began to climb back to the track. I was choosing a place, said Jack. I was just waiting for a moment to decide where to stab him. You should stick a pig, said Ralph fiercely. They always talk about sticking a pig. You cut a pig's throat to let the blood out, said Jack. Otherwise you can't eat the meat. Why didn't you? They knew very well why he hadn't. Because of the enormity of the knife descending and cutting into living flesh, because of the unbearable blood. I was going to, said Jack. He was ahead of them, and they could not see his face. I was choosing a place. Next time. He snatched his knife out of the sheath and slammed it into a tree trunk. Next time there would be no mercy. He looked around fiercely, daring them to contradict. Then they broke out into the sunlight, and for a while they were busy finding and devouring food as they moved down the scard toward the platform and the meeting. So this time, instead of doing a free write, I'll have you have a conversation with each other. Let's pretend that this was the short passage that you got on the test. Again, it won't be a passage that you recognize. So you really want to just focus on this passage right here. Pretend that this is all the information you have about this book. And you're going to have a conversation about, the prompt would be, what does this passage reveal about the boys, like all of them, the boys' relationship to their setting? So what does it reveal about the boys' relationship to their setting at this point in the book, this passage right here? So have a conversation about what you're thinking. What does it reveal about their relationship to the setting? And for you, Allie, at home, do a little free write about this.
So they were kind of ready to go. Higher on the hierarchy, but he's ashamed. Yeah, he doesn't. So.
Okay, now on your paper, I want you to find 3 details. We're doing this kind of the opposite way, see what works best for you. Find 3 details just from that passage that is kind of, you think, telling and revealing what their relationship is to their setting. So remember, the details that you're trying to find are short quotations, 1 to 4 word quotations that you think are revealing. Yes.
Does that be literal setting, or could it be like social setting?
Oh, it could be, yeah, you could do metaphorical, social setting. I like that a lot. I mean, I think the social qualities are part of the setting, so that works really well. Okay, so you're writing down 3 details from this little passage that reveal their relationship. Yep. Okay, I know a couple of you have found those three. If you're still looking for the quotes, keep doing that. But our next step then is to write that thesis statement based on those quotes. So you're looking at this passage, you're focusing only on this passage. The book is set, or the prompt says, what is the relationship between the boys and their setting? And you have to figure out a way to find a theme that is emerging just in this little passage. So you're not worried about whether or not that theme is supported in the rest of the book. If you are a good close reader, then it will be. But that's not necessarily your job. You're trying to look at a theme that is revealed just in this little section. So I think in this little section, there's a lot revealed about kind of people's natural state or people's socialized state. And there's a lot revealed about like peer pressure and the way that boys interact, I think. So it's not just Jack and Ralph who are talking like this with each other, right? It's kind of representative of maybe a more generalized theme. It can still be really specific, like when boys are in a violent setting, this is how they behave, but you're trying to look at like something that is not just for this book, right? So same as all of your essays, you're still looking for theme. And then one of the literary characteristics you'll be talking about, well, no, for this one, it's different. So for your literary characteristics, you want to look at something in the pattern of the quotations that you found. And it could be multiple things in the pattern of the quotations. It could be the tone, it could be the way they're speaking to each other, it could be the narration, it could be the way that the setting is described, and so on. So try and write a thesis statement that captures the literary qualities and theme of this little passage. Give it a shot. And then we'll watch some BBC. Okay, so if you're absent today, I'm going to share my screen, but if it doesn't look good or the sound isn't showing up, the link is on Canvas. Yeah, we will be watching this in a second, but I do want you to share your thesis statements with each other. So for this, you're going to tell them one specific great thing they did. So don't just say good word choice, say this was a good word choice and explain why. And then one specific thing they could improve with their
There's specific narration for applies to social studies. By switching from cautious versus the author illustrates that just
All right. Just from eavesdropping, you guys are getting very good at evaluating people's thesis statements, which means that you can recognize when yours is good and when yours struggles, right? And well, hopefully, sometimes it's hard to be self-reflective like that. So moving forward, we got to practice structure for your essay. So that's what we'll be kind of working on next there. But it kind of sounded like thesis statements are getting pretty strong. Would you agree with that about your own thesis? Oh no. Okay, so BBC did a social experiment where they're going to explain the experiment to you, but basically they wanted to see what boys will be like when they are on their own, or is at least as much on their own as you can be legally these days. So this is from the early 2000s, I want to say. Has anyone seen this? You have seen it on TV. Did you see it in school or did you just see it on your own?
I have no idea.
Yeah, it's like it kind of goes around on YouTube. They eventually did this with girls too, to kind of like test. And so we'll watch part of Girls Alone as well. But we're going to watch the first half hour of this right now. And while you're watching, you don't have to take notes or anything. But if you want to remember things, you can. We're going to talk about afterwards which behaviors seem to line up with the behaviors of the boys in Lord of the Flies. Now, obviously, they are alone on a jungle. These boys are alone in the house, but you're still going to see some repeating behaviors here. So here we go.
How protective do we really need to be of our children? And just how dependent are they on us? What would happen if children were actually left to live alone together? 10 boys from Bushey in Hertfordshire were chosen to live by themselves in this house for 5 days. Aged 11 and 12, none of them had met beforehand. The house and garden were filled with toys, games, books, and paints. The kitchen was stocked with food. Cameras were put in the bedrooms to monitor the boys at night, and during the day there was a camera crew in the house. The crew didn't speak to the boys and only intervened for reasons of safety. The first the boys saw of their new home was when they arrived at 10:30 one Monday morning.
It's mine. Oh, this is so big. Yeah, I'm going upstairs. Oh,
bell the boys could ring at any time if they needed help. They could speak to the production team, a nurse, their parents, or to a child psychiatrist who each had met beforehand. They were also free to leave the house at any time. Upstairs, there were 2 bedrooms. The larger one had 6 beds. The smaller one had 4. 10 cameras had been left out for the boys to use. George was the first to take a picture. There were also 10 water pistols. It was Daniel who got hold of the biggest. Once the ice was broken, everyone began to introduce themselves. Then it was time to check out each other's schools.
School do you go to? Fishing meets. Do you live near your school? Yeah. Where? What road? Beachcroft Road. Really?
The boys couldn't believe the freedom they'd been given, and for the first hour, they just ran riot. Michael was taken to task for throwing sticky popcorn all over the carpet.
In the garden. When we leave, our names, God went on the bottom, like they do in Subway, please, George.
But soon everybody was trashing the place, as if to see what it would take to make an adult intervene.
I didn't get any on your face. That's just so out of order. Let me get someone on it. Yeah, on my neck. I'll get it paid up in a minute. I did a little stripe on you. I'll give anybody a good list.
By the evening, the mess they'd made was already bothering them.
We never expected it to be like that, but I'm really upset that we had trashed it so badly. We were trying to explore everything at once, weren't we? Yeah. We got too carried away in ourselves. Those balls are just really bloody things. What are they doing? It's really lovely. It's just sitting there being black and all horrible, isn't it? You can have scrape it. I can't scrape it off. Yes, you can. It's fine. Look. It's coming off. That's when we get off. This how desperate we are. It doesn't work. Oh, that's still wet. Come here, Bosby. Yes. Give me something to wipe it.
Stuff.
Sorry.
We love stuff. And there's some really great stuff out there.
You idiot! That's my freaking talent, idiot.
In the absence of parental discipline, the boys decided to restore order themselves.
Well, if you need yes, actually no heads. Right, see, I'll think of one person in your head who you can vote for. You can't vote for yourself. You can't vote for yourself. Oh, wait. Right, who voted for Robert? Robert, yeah. Who voted for Who voted for George? 3 people, that's healthy, that's healthy. Who voted for me? Who voted for George? You're right. Hi. Oh. Yeah, I got three.
By electing George as their leader, the boys had created their own version of a parent figure. And George's first task was to gather up everyone's complaints, almost all of which turned out to be directed at Michael.
Ran to him, Michael ran into him on bike. Daniel has been ran into a bike as well. Yeah, that was massive. Yeah, but you should be pretty glad you ride into Michael. I'm gonna show you Michael. Okay, I'm gonna make a plane for Michael. Here he goes again. It's not a bloody court thing for make a plane for Michael. Well, if you come up to it, throw a rugby ball in my bag, and you threw helmets at me.
After the meeting, most of the boys went upstairs to bed. Paul and Mark chose to sleep outside.
Steve, time for sweeties. Come on, we got one light straight up. Have we? Don't go to sleep with it in your mouth.
And Luke and Michael decided to sleep downstairs.
I'll sleep on it.
It's the morning of the second day, and after only a few hours sleep, the boys are already getting up. There still hasn't been an organized meal, and sugar has been the main source of sustenance.
It's an Eskimo.
Futile attempts at cleaning the walls are still going on.
Do a bit more later, we need to let it dry. Yeah, I'll totally agree. What? I agree. I'm getting my boy.
Everyone had completed a cooking course before the week began, though at this stage, you wouldn't know it. There were 2 vegetarians in the house. One was Sim, the other was Luke.
Cheese is the new cheese.
By midday, sheer hunger had pushed most of the boys into culinary creativity.
Anyway, it's me and Michael's. Get a food and focus. Oh, great, someone's blown up what food. That looks good, actually.
Although the boys were getting on well, the big underlying issue was still about who was doing the cleaning.
Oh. Maybe this has got a problem because they want to avoid doing the work. Oh, what's not this morning? At least not since this was the. Yes, you're washing up. Tomorrow and the day after then. And you got to cook everyone's food. You clean this room. I can't clean this room by myself. In an hour you could. Yeah, in an hour. I'm not going to waste my time. That's not fun, not boring. Well, you're not meant to like not do anything. It sounds like well, start doing it then. You've got a headache right now. God, everyone's done some work. Yeah, and I am. When? Soon's not soon enough. Sorry. I didn't have to do it. All I've had is chocolates and ice cream. I didn't even have those. I didn't even have lunch ready. So when we cook, it's horrible. What? When we cook our food, it's disgusting. What food? When we cook food. Awesome. Mine is. Oh no, you're dead. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up.
Early in the evening, Michael decided to sleep in the tent with George, but this only made them a sitting target for the rest of the group.
You can hit the tent as much as you want. All right, you're back here. Yay! Escape mission to hit the tent. No one. It's not the blue side. Not the blue side. Well, there's two blue sides. Not this side because my hands are up. All right. My hands are up. Got my hands. Don't tip the tent over either. We won't. Don't put coke in it. We won't. Don't spit. Oh, I just got this kick there. I'm actually kicking it. That just hit my face.
By the second evening, several of the boys were saying they were feeling homesick. It was at this point that Sim asked to see his parents.
Oh. No wonder he doesn't like his cooking.
Despite his homesickness, Sim decided to stay in the house. George, who was still trying to be a leader, came inside to look after him.
Come, George. You want to sleep on the same time? Just on the tent. Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm going to check them out. Okay, yeah. I'm cutting out. Exactly.
Since there wasn't enough room in the tent for three, George and Michael decided to keep watch over Sim while he tried to get some sleep.
I see. A couple of ghost stories, but I forgot now. But then there are a couple of ghost stories I forgot. This is really scary. Well, it's not ghost, but it is ghost. I got a film. What is it? Exorcist. Yeah. Seen that? Have you? Yeah, scary, isn't it? Yeah, turn his head around. Yeah. What? Yeah, of course. I'm still here. Okay, I'll turn mine off. You're right. Yeah. Is it this noise? Do you absolutely have to? Yeah. Well, sort of, part of the national I can go inside, please. Do you want a punch? Do you know I mean that? Oh my God, I hate rock. Smack Daniel in the eye. Please keep the noise down. Sim is actually sleeping. No, he is actually sleeping.
At 1 in the morning, Michael had gone back into the house and left George to sleep alone in the tent with Sim.
It's not scary, it's not still. It's quite fun actually. Is it there? What? Have you chocolate available? Have you chocolate available? I'm starving.
The mess and lack of organisation was still bothering everyone, and there was still lots of argument about who should do what.
E.G. not me and Lou. Yeah, E.G. not me. E.G. is it. Yeah. I don't know. So maybe you take the sweet one and put something else in it. Put it in a different box. Vegetarian nuggets, vegetarian nuggets, yeah. Oh my goodness. You vegetarian. No, but you want to be on this funny thing. You take the sweet one. I'll make my own food. Sure. Yeah, so we're doing it for Lou. What? Chips this week on veggie nuggets or something. All right, then I'll make it tomorrow. All right, yeah. Wait, people in the house. Shut up. I have to ask you one question. Not me. Cleaning now or tonight? I think it's just nothing that should drying up now with you. Because I know that someone's going to be 2 times a day I can't move it up padding. Shut up! Oh, don't forget stuff. I told you we should get hot water. Yeah, he's got a boner. You got one. You got one feet. You got my
Boys were now halfway through their stay. This was the nearest most of them had come to having a wash and changing their clothes. Some were also beginning to talk openly about how much they were looking forward to going home. Luke and Paul, together with Daniel, were emerging as the most assertive boys in the house, and they decided it was time for a communal meal.
That one, I didn't even turn it on. Put the finger on. Just keep hitting. Keep hitting. It's not on fire.
The seating order was to be a powerful expression of the pecking order in the house.
No, sit here, sit here. Right, yeah. Where's my ketchup? I know. I'm sitting there. Wasn't I just sitting there and I just got out? No, you're not. You ain't sitting here. We're sitting here. Yeah, mate. I sit there. I'm sitting there. Well, somebody should be the people first thing. No, I'm sitting there. I'm sitting here. I'm sitting there. I'll talk them in. No, you're not. We've all reserved these bloody seats. Because they're the cooks. Guess the ones. At the end, someone sit down. No, they're not. No one's actually sitting there. Yeah, that's your place. Stand up. It's safe. I don't want to show you. Where's the rest of the speak? Oh, you're learning it. Where's the time now? Hallelujah. Where's the other ones on? Oh, it's not going off. There's a kid up here. Yes, it's it. Oh, I want to have that one. And then you then.
Like vibing to the hottest songs? Well, now with YouTube Premium's background play, you can keep one.
Just for Alex, from now on we're going to call him Alexandra. Yeah. No, we're going to call him Alex. Okay, there's Georgina, Michelle, Danielle, George, Sim and Michael are doing washing up today. I think it's time to do a run. How about it? Yes, now. And go to sleep, little baby. Come over here and go to sleep, little baby. Naughty baby. Shut down. Good night, little echo baby. Get down. Give him a massage.
An hour after the boys had finished their first group meal, Sim was still washing up.
Okay, that's where we're gonna end. Okay, all right.
By agreeing to do the clearing up for all 10 boys, Sim had now finally established his place in the group.
Nope.
Michael had been labelled as troublesome ever since spreading popcorn everywhere on the first day. And whatever he did now, the label stuck.
Shut the door so we can't get out. Lock it. Yeah. Attracting. Push him up. Right, Michael. We need a guard. Oh. He's my friend. Yeah, let him out. Hey, he's friend. He's done to the chair over. Yes, yes. Give him a good whip. Now let's leave it. Now let's pick him up. Drink the lead.
Okay, that's where we'll end it. I don't want to go too far because I don't want to spoil Lord of the Flies in case it's spot on with what happens, you know? So, are you seeing a ton of similarities? Like maybe the stakes are not quite as high. We don't have the threat of potential nuclear war here. You don't have, you don't have them having to hunt for meat, right? But there are lots of similarities, I think, in their behavior that might point to whether or not this book is trying to say that this is our innate, like what we are born with behavior. This is who we are naturally, and society is the only thing that makes us have manners or like be civil to each other. Or if potentially it comes from them being suppressed all their lives, if they were kind of controlled in a certain way by society, and so they got to let it all out. Or if society has like made them this way, has society taught these boys certain things about how to be a person that is coming out just in maybe more unstructured ways here, but could be coming out naturally. So basically I'm saying, is it nature or is it nurture? That's a question we're going to be thinking about as we're going through this book. But what I want you to do is with your groups that you normally work in, I want you to make a list of the similarities that you see between Boys Alone and the beginning of Lord of the Flies. You can notice behaviors, and you can also think about how characters might match up with what's happened with some of these boys. All right, do that. I'm gonna go grab our copies. That is for sure. My brother, all he wants to do is run I'm really? Yeah, not my brother. I don't know what it is. Yeah, they don't like that's George. And then there's always seems to be like an outcast and
Not quite the same.
and like a troublemaker. I also like how originally they were like, but then they were like, oh wait, yeah, actually live. In the book, the little ones just like do whatever they want, and that's kind of similar to this. They just want to have fun.
Once you finish the book,
They get annoyed.
6-year-old would hurt. I'm almost. That would be so.
They're like,
Just like fun word, but it's not like
they like set up. They tried to set up rules, like their own choices. I think they thought that they needed to make rules. They were like, oh, well, like what?
Who's the most hated person?
And they have a lot of like, oh, we make rules. Yeah. That they break. Right? Yeah, it's just a tried. All of them like have responsibility on this. But I would
Yeah.
Same here.
You know, like,
Still drawn on the walls, but like not like
this person was here. But they wrote like here, like or hi. Somebody got shot. I was like, is this how British spell?
Yeah. Also, I love when I tried to scrub her super off for me. When they have yellow paper, they can layer over it.
I know, they're not very bright, they are 11. So.
Yeah, no, they haven't like, the young boys are
Like,
less developed than young girls. Not that we thought that we were girl wise.
I think it's gonna be a lot of sassy on the girl.
I know, like
They're
a lot of.
I will-
Yes.
With like the hair pulling.
Oh,
Yeah.
I wonder, like, if they did like, experiment, like the same. I think it would be, like, if it would probably be a lot.
Cause I think we know how to be more.
Yeah.
And
That
I
might
think
be a lot.
That would be a. Me neither, that would be so much. I know, you like.
Okay. All right, tell me some of the, actually, I want a pen, write these down. Tell me some of the similarities that you guys are seeing between the book and the show. Ash? Okay, they elect a leader almost immediately, right? What do you think that's about? Like, why, if we're talking about like human nature, and I think this book is like very much about human nature, why is there this sort of like impetus to elect a leader immediately?
I think it's like they want someone else to be responsible,
Oh,
like they want to have fun and not want to be responsible. So,
that's interesting. Is that why we have a leader? Is because we want someone else to be responsible? Like we don't want to be responsible ourselves. We'd rather have somebody telling us what to do. That's interesting. Abby?
Also, I think part of it is you want people to blame.
So we want a kind of like, not so much a scapegoat, because I think Sim might be the scapegoat, but we want somebody that when something goes wrong, we can say it's all that person's fault. Why do we want that? Like it gets the blame off ourselves, right? I also think it kind of simplifies the blame. Blame is a very difficult topic to pinpoint, right? Like who is to blame for, you know, the Russian invasion of Ukraine? Like we can just say Putin, right? But that kind of like, it's a way of simplifying it. So because Putin's a leader, we can say, oh, it was Putin is to blame, or it's Biden who's to blame, or it's Trump who's to blame. And we can say all these like leaders are to blame, but really it's like a series of extremely complex issues that have led up to this moment, right? And our brains do not want to recognize that complexity. Allison? Yes. So they always want to set the rules, like here's what we are going to do, right? But then it almost feels like the joy of setting the rules, or the purpose of setting the rules, is ultimately to break the rules. I just had a passage from the book that was just talking about that. Oh, it's when they want to set up leadership and so that they can bonk and doink people. It's at the beginning of chapter 2. It says Jack is on his feet and he says, "We'll have rules," he cried excitedly, "lots of rules. Then when anyone breaks them, oh, wacko, bong, doink." So they're like pretending to like, at least I assume it's just them yelling things, but they're like pretending to like beat people up for breaking the rules, right? So like there's this way that it's like the only reason that we have rules is because the punishment of those rules is going to be so much fun. And you see like George being tied up and they're like, let's whip him, right? Or no, it's Michael being tied up. And they're like, let's give him a good whipping or whatever. It's just this like, it's like this really enjoyable thing about punishing people for breaking the rules. What is that about? Why do you think people have that? I'm going to say people rather than just boys, because you'll see Girls Alone is not that much different. Yeah, Allison. Okay, yeah. So it's not necessarily about the control that comes from the rules, although that can be nice and you see some boys yearning for that kind of control, right? But it's also the control that comes from enforcing the rules that's satisfying. And that might be more aligned with power than with control too. Octavia?
I think that when they don't know what else to do, they kind of go back to where they were in the house, like their parents.
Yeah.
And punishments for them.
Yeah, and it's almost like a reversion to civilization. Usually we say a reversion is back to kind of our innate animalistic states, right? But here they're like reverting back to civilization as a way to find comfort. And you see them do that in the book all the time too, when they're thinking of home, like as they're trying to fall asleep, they think of home, or Piggy constantly is like, well, my aunt would say this, you know, to try and find those rules. Ash?
There's an outcast.
Yes. Outcast and troublemaker. So in Boys Alone, who would you say is the outcast? All right. And who would you say is the troublemaker? Michael. All right. Now in the book, who's the outcast? Peggy. And who is the troublemaker in the book? Jack. Jack. I also think there's Roger in there too. Like Jack at least has some sort of semblance of leadership. Like he wants to be a leader. He wants to have control. And so here he is like leading people into battle with the pig, you know, like he wants to be, it's almost like he's the head of the military in the book kind of. But then you have somebody like Roger, who's a little bit more chaotic, who kind of stands out on his own and throws rocks at people, right? Where he's just like, I want to be a force of chaos on my own. So Roger might more fall under that troublemaker category, whereas Jack is something else. Jack is something very disturbing, which is like a leader, but with different intents than, you know, Ralph or George in the movie. Yeah.
I also think it's like interesting that they all based everyone's.
Oh yeah. Okay, first impressions. How does that happen in the book? Someone explain to me how that happens. Yeah. Uh-huh. The leader, Ralph.
Ralph didn't care much. He was like,
Yeah.
it kind of stuck.
Well, to me, it's really interesting that they just kind of like decide Ralph as leader. There could have been other boys in that group, I'm assuming, who also could be leader, but it's sort of like, and it's almost like the book is, the narrator is on the side of kind of the group dynamics, because the book also kind of decides Ralph as leader, but it feels a little arbitrary to me. Like, I don't know that Ralph demonstrates any real leadership qualities before he is decided on as leader, you know? And also the book decides very quickly that Piggy is like the one that we're going to bully, you know? And it's not just hang on. It's not just Ralph and the other boys who want to bully Piggy. It's the book itself. There's a line here, and this is not from anyone's point of view, that says Piggy was, it's kind of through Ralph's eyes, but it's not spoken in dialogue. It says, Piggy was a bore. His fat assmar and his matter-of-fact ideas were dull. That's like from the narrator's perspective, right? And you'll notice that when Piggy says, like, sorry, I'm trying to sit in a place where I can see everybody. There we go. When Piggy says, don't call me that, like, oh my gosh, like, well, my name, I want to tell you my name, but just don't call me what they called me at school. It's just right at the beginning. No. Sorry, spoiler alert, but no. And he says, they used to call me Piggy. Ralph shrieked with laughter. He jumped up, Piggy, Piggy, Ralph, please. Piggy clasped his hands in apprehension. So immediately the book also starts to say, yep, you're Piggy. We're going to call you Piggy now. Like, the book almost delights in his being bullied too. So based on first impressions, right? Like, based on Michael being like throwing popcorn, based on Sim not wanting to do the dishes or whatever, they're now slotted into certain roles within the group. Yeah, Allison.
Jack, like he's introduced as do? And then he says, my name is Jack. And
Yes, and he wants to be known as Meridu, right? But everybody else in the book is sort of just like, no, you're Jack. And so the book accepts the group dynamics. Yeah, our narrator is very much on the side of the group rather than the individual. So it's going to reflect what the group feels like at any one time, which is a really interesting tactic. Yeah.
One thing I thought was really interesting that I think is more like a not so much documentary
Hmm.
is they really focused on the like survival instincts with clothing, like when it got hot, they like all shook down and like
Yeah.
in the documentary they kind of did it like within 3 minutes, like 3 of the boys had
Shirts
shirt
off. Yeah.
So I was like, that it's not survival instincts there, but like yeah, I thought that was very interesting that they made that a big point.
Completely, yeah. Like these boys are running around this island basically naked, you know. Actually the movie version of this is from the 60s and it's not rated, and so it's like approved for us to show in high school, but the whole thing is just little boy butts running around, you know. For most of it they you know, they're clothed, they're wearing pants at least, but for lots of parts of it they're just like, let's go swimming, you know. And it's just like they're all just like naked on this island. Actually, Huck Finn talks about the same thing. Huck Finn is like, finally Huck and his friend Jim are alone on a raft and they're just like floating down the river, and so Huck is just like, it was awesome, we just like took off all our clothes and we were naked all the time. What is that about? Because that doesn't happen in Girls Alone. So why rip off their shirts right away? Or why does Ralph like feel like, oh, no adults, awesome, no clothes? Yeah, Allison.
trying to school uniforms is probably.
Yeah, and symbolic, right? Like take off the trappings of control that the world has, that civilization has forced you into. Shed all of those like signs of like you being institutionalized, and now you just get to be your basic natural self. So it's kind of this idea of like complete freedom. Yeah.
It's been the same thing with cross country. Like
Really?
we'll wear basically nothing. 'Cause it's just like ultimate, like it's all about how comfortable you are.
Yeah. So part of it is because of the physical demands of like survival too. So it's sort of like, I'm focusing on something else right now. I don't have to focus on the kind of like manners or like polite society rules. Totally get that. Yeah. Any other ideas? It is interesting though. The girls in Girls Alone do not.
Wait, did they do another one where it was girls?
Yeah, we're gonna watch part of it, but like nobody pulls off their shirt, you know, like nobody, like they're in like, they're very like, not like fashionable the whole time. It's interesting. Yeah, Allison.
I do think that girls are taught that they can't take off their shirts, but boys can.
Yeah, that's true. And so in this, it's, they're just like, oh yeah, it's fine. Like I could be, you know, exposed to the world or whatever. Right, for sure. And those rules of civilization might stick around. And in this little movie too, it's like, it's a little bit false. They know there's cameras there. You saw the guy trying to get out of the way. Like there are adults there. So it's not only boys alone. That would be bonkers if it could be, you know, like that's got to be illegal. But it can be, they're trying to simulate it. So part of that, like maybe these boys would have just stripped all the way too if there hadn't been adults there. I don't know, boys. Yeah. No, we won't watch it today. Yeah. Okay, any other similarities that you see between the two? One thing that I thought was really interesting is the way that they immediately want to know about names and rank and where they're from and so on. That happens in the book too. Piggy is like insisting, like, let's do some introductions. Let's make sure we know who everyone is. And then another thing I really liked in this was the way that they were deciding on the table.
That was so like.
It's so annoying.
Sure, kid, like just sit down.
Right, but like, do you remember those birthday parties where you don't just sit down? Maybe that seems very much like female socialization too. So I don't know if this applies to boys' birthday parties, but I feel like the birthday parties with like a lot of girls where there's like a big table, there was a lot of like, no, she's sitting next to me. No, I get to be next to the birthday girl or whatever. And it talks about this like being a hierarchy in the show. It's like they all want to show like their relationship to power by the way how they sit at the table. So I think it's really interesting the way that matches up with when they want to go explore the island. And Ralph is like, well, I'll go because I'm the leader. I'll take Jack because he's clearly a leader for whatever reason. He's the leader of the choir boys that was already in place, but he also just has these qualities that make him somebody I want with me on this expedition. And then they just randomly choose Simon. And they're like, Simon, you'll be with us. And Simon kind of then gets this sort of power status, at least a little bit of power, because he was randomly chosen. And Piggy is desperate to go on this expedition. And they're like, no, Piggy, you stay behind. Yeah.
So I was just wondering about like the choir boys, like it, like described them so weirdly when they first like walked on. They were like,
Yeah.
did they like walk up in like black hoods and like robes and stuff? Like, to
Yes.
the group? Like
Let's find that spot.
that confused me.
Yeah, find the choir boys for me.
I was so confused.
They're from this like very stodgy British school. And they've been going on this, there it is, page 19. They've been going on this class field trip somewhere. But they don't all know each other. So I don't quite know the circumstances, unless I missed it, but I don't know the circumstances of why they are going on this trip. They don't say anything, do they? In the first 4 chapters? Okay, I didn't think so. So here they are going on, here they are though, like in these different sort of like pods of people. Like you've got really young kids, and it talks about how they kind of break off. You've got older kids like Ralph and Piggy, and then you've got this choir. When it describes him, you are totally right. It's the weirdest description. Within the diamond haze of the beach, something dark was fumbling along. Ralph saw it first and watched how the intentness of his gaze drew all eyes that way. Then the creature stepped from mirage onto clear sand, and they saw that the darkness was not all shadow, but mostly clothing. The creature was a party of boys, marching approximately in step in 2 parallel lines and dressed in strangely eccentric clothing. Shorts, shirts, and different garments they carried in their hands, but each boy wore a square black cap with a silver badge on it. Their bodies from throat to ankle were hidden in black cloaks, which bore a long silver cross on the left breast, and each neck was finished off with a ham-bone frill. The heat of the tropics, the descent, the search for food, and now this sweaty march along the blazing beach had given them the complexions of newly washed plums. The boy who controlled them was dressed in the same way, though his cap badge was golden. When his party was about 10 yards from the platform, he shouted an order and they halted, gasping, sweating, swaying in the fierce light. The boy himself came forward, vaulted onto the platform with his cloak flying, and peered into what to him was almost complete darkness. So they're wearing like choir robes that I imagine that if you were British, you would kind of recognize them as choir robes, you know? They've got these caps that like signal they're all part of a group. But the way they're wearing them and the way that they're marching together, what is going on there? I think there's some symbolism going on. Like who does this group kind of like represent in society? They're kind of Death Eaters, yeah. I mean, they're wearing all black, they're marching, and they're wearing all black, even though it's like obviously not right for the temperature, because it talks about how their faces look like plums. They're like overheating. They're gonna have heat stroke because of this. In a real society, what do they represent? And the Death Eaters, who do they represent? I mean, there's some Nazi imagery here a little bit. There's some military imagery and some like totalitarian military imagery. So here you have this book that was written in 54, right? Post Nazi Germany. The Death Eaters are Nazis. We know this, right? Okay. yeah. The Death Eaters are like sort of based on, you know, people who are like obsessed with lineage and like killing off mudbloods and so on. Yeah. So here you've got this group that is like all walking in parallel lines, almost like Nazis would goose step, right? Like these very like clear marching lines. And here you've got this guy at the front who is controlling them, and nothing that they are doing is good for them, but it is all this kind of like show of power. Yeah, yes, definitely. Okay, I want to talk about leadership qualities here. Do you think Ralph so far in the book is a good leader? Or let me ask this first. What qualities does a good leader need to have? All right, what else? Yeah. Sander.
They move easily socially.
Oh, like social acceptance? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
And by move easily, do you mean like among different groups?
Not so much as that. It's more like you see Piggy and they just hate him because he's horrible. But then Ralph, he's very graceful.
Oh, okay, I got it. Like, so yeah, your social ease, it's like socially adept, like really kind of knows how to interact with people.
I'd say assertive.
Yeah, they need to have some kind of assertive power because at some point their power might be challenged and they need to reevaluate or they need to reassert it. Yeah,
Have to be constant.
what do you mean by that?
Like, you can't just pick and choose when you're gonna be the leader and when you're just gonna go like screw around and just kind of like do exactly what you like.
All right,
said
cool.
not to do.
Cool. So it's about them being like consistent in that role. If you're committed to that role, you're gonna stay in that role. Okay? Anything else that a leader needs to have, Sandra? More competent than like everybody else?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like in some ways, whatever the situation requires, he needs to be the best at that thing. So if you're being a leader in a classroom, you need to be the one who knows the material the most. Or if you're being a leader on an island, you need to be the one who has the most survival skills, right? Okay, Abby?
I think it's not so much more competent as better at making decisions.
Ah, okay, so more competent at decision making. Which kind of goes with assertive, right? But it's like you are able to do that quickly and able to do that, and able to apply that easily. All right, got it? Yes, this is.
I think maybe like the bigger person, like more mature than everyone else, which I guess is subjective. But
Yeah, and in this case, they look to Ralph partly because he's older too. Yeah, I think.
With like the competence, they definitely don't need to be the best at everything, like by any means, they just need to know who is the best person for the job at everything,
Okay.
like
knowledge
delegation and stuff like that.
about who is, and they need to be comfortable delegating.
Mhm.
So they don't want to do everything themselves. Yeah.
I think to be in typical society, a lot of those types like appearances of big things, how you present your personality, because it sticks, like you were saying earlier. And like, I think they make it a big point with Luke and Ralph, like Ralph is like the one that's slightly better looking. You're like, oh, everyone thinks he's gonna be more athletic and have more survival skills, which isn't necessarily true,
But yeah, I mean, that's fascinating. I mean, one of the reasons that Nixon lost to JFK is because Nixon sweat too much on TV, right? Everybody was just like, oh, this guy, no thanks. I don't want to look at his face every day, you know? So there's this way that like, yeah, probably being better looking helps your cause as a leader. Allison? Yeah, okay, so it's not just about knowing what they're capable of, but also just knowing their emotional state, knowing the way they think, understand the group. All right, cool. Any others? Okay, I want you to talk with each other for a second about whether you think Ralph is a good leader then. Does he fit into these characteristics?
And shows promises to people, I don't think he's mature. I don't-
I think he is.
I think he might, like, saying, let's do this, but then he says,
Like based on
Yeah. He like has like flashes of things that like they should be doing these Jackie, but then instead it just is like everybody's off taking baths, very not like actually force anything that he thinks is
I
good.
think he tries. On paper, he looks good. But I think
Like he knows what's basically right. He doesn't know how to enforce
he's
anything,
constantly
so
challenging.
nobody actually does that.
Yes, sir, that
to
dog.
be fair, it's a bunch of, it's like
What,
26-year-olds.
groups starting to come out and trying to be the leader of a whole, but it's not really.
Okay, then I want you to find one quote from this that shows that your ideas about his level of leadership, his ability to lead, is correct. So find a quote that backs up what you were saying about his leadership capabilities. Who has their quote? Raise your hand if you got your quote. Now, who's got their quote? Raise your hand. All right, let's look at a couple of these. So, who wants to volunteer? Let's look at his leadership. Yeah, Whitney.
I chose on page 25, it says he hovered between the two forces of apology or further insult.
I don't have this one marked. What does the paragraph start with?
Still this descended on them, Ralph looking for.
Oh, okay. Got it. He hovered between the two courses of apology or further insult. So what does that tell us about his leadership qualities?
I think it tells us that like he has the qualities, but he doesn't quite know how to use them yet. So he's stuck in this point of like, well, as a leader, I should be apologizing and making amends to the group together. But you know, there's that part of it's like, well, I don't really know if that's necessary. I just keep insulting him.
Yeah, okay. So this could be him sort of like deciding on the selfish quality of insulting Piggy, or this could be him deciding on like, I'm gonna do, you know, the nice thing, and maybe the nice thing's better for the group. Let me ask that. Is insulting Piggy better for the group, or is apologizing to Piggy and trying to like incorporate him into the group better for the group?
He's the smartest one.
Okay.
I feel like they could use his insights a lot more than they do use his insights.
Okay, so they've chosen the wrong kid to be the scapegoat. Maybe if they chose a useless kid to bully all the time, that could be a way to have some group like cohesiveness, right? I mean, isn't that true? There's a Parks and Rec where that happens. Do you guys watch that show, Parks and Recreation? Like there's this one guy on it, Jerry, who is like the office like butt of the joke. Everybody like makes fun of him and he's annoying, right? Well, one day Jerry has a fart attack. He has a heart attack and he's farting while he does it. Anyway, he's in the hospital or no, is this when Jerry retires? Maybe it's when Jerry retires. Anyway, I can't remember. Anyway, Aziz Ansari's character is terrified that he's going to become the new office Jerry, because everyone recognizes that you got to have one person at the office that everybody's picking on, you know, that kind of smooths the way for everybody else to make mistakes, because we just focus all of our attention on Jerry's mistakes and we don't have to look at everybody else's mistakes. So in some ways, having a scapegoat can be great for dynamics, group dynamics. If you have one kid that you bully all the time, all the rest of the kids get out of bullying and they can kind of like bond together over how much they think Piggy is dumb or ridiculous, right? But maybe they've chosen the wrong kid to bully, and Ralph is kind of stuck here between that. Do I incorporate Piggy into the group, or do I kind of support what the group has already decided and kind of you know, make sure Piggy stays out of it? Yeah.
I choose the quote from like what we were looking at before on the last chapter of the seventh show. He snatched his knife out of the sheath and slammed it. I think that shows like the and like the part after where it's like next time it knows. I think it shows that he's trying to line up with like the social norms, but struggling.
Yeah, that part right there is Jack that is doing this. But I think we could also talk about Jack's leadership qualities, because Jack is really thirsting for the leadership role. Like he really wants to be leader, right? And so for him, he sees the leader though as more associated with violence, I think, than Ralph does. So here's Jack, who's like, gets angry at himself for not being able to be violent and says, next time there will be no mercy, sort of like, next time I will assert my authority completely. Before we move on, let me ask, does violence make someone a stronger leader or a weaker leader? Okay, tell me.
So violence in Jack's case is going to use it for certain dominance and then like actually getting through the group. But then you see someone, this doesn't do it. Piggy just uses like social violence. He just like scrabbles for power, so he just yell at people. He's mad all the time.
Okay, so if it's a leader acting out with violence and it feels like it's only going to serve his own self-interest or like his own feelings, then that's going to make ineffective leadership. The leader looks weaker. But if it is a leader who uses violence to get something for the group, then that can be something that looks better. Okay, Allison?
I feel like using violence is still harmful because, because he's focused on.
Okay, so there might be other things that are more important than what the violence can achieve for you, right? They have said that there are fruit on this island. Now, some of the fruit they're eating is giving them diarrhea, and I don't know when they're gonna figure that out. Right, right. It's kind of like them with the chocolate and Boys Alone, you know? But shelter and building a fire and all of that seems to be extremely important. And because he's so obsessed with his violent goals, he's kind of missing the survival goals that they need.
The question of like violence leadership kind of falls into like how is Batman different than the Joker if you really think about it? They both use violence, but they're different end goals. It's just in society, one is deemed okay because using it against other friends.
Yeah. Yeah, you can look at them as leaders too. One is deemed okay because we're going to follow him as a leader and follow his goals. And the other one, we decide, no, those aren't the goals we're going to follow. And are those as clearly set in stone morally as we think they are? That's kind of what we're going with, where we're going with this actually. Yeah. Cecilia, you had another spot we're going to look at.
It was around that same area that we talked about.
Mhm.
And it was just when Ralph was like, "You should stick a pig." They always,
Yeah.
and he says it fiercely. They always talk about sticking the pig, and I think that on paper Ralph looks like a really good leader, but I think in practice it's hard, especially with Jack being there. So I think in this spot he's trying to like reassert his like leadership
Yes.
in a group that's like starting to slowly become more and more divided.
Yes.
So I think that Ralph tries to be a good leader, but I think that the group dynamics make it difficult.
Yeah, I like that part because Jack says, I'm going to stab him. Ralph says, you got to stick him. Jack says, you got to cut its throat. Like they're going back and forth about this violent exchange. Anyone in here a vegetarian? We're going to talk about killing pigs a lot. Okay, I'm sorry. I apologize. But for the whole unit, we're talking about killing pigs a lot. Anyway, so like there's this sort of like which violent way is going to be more competent. So when we look here, Jack is kind of saying, whoop, right there. Jack is saying, I am the most competent. And so I deserve to be leader. And the way Ralph says it is they always talk about sticking a pig. So he's like, I know about what is competent and I can kind of delegate and that should make me the best leader. So the sort of like battle going on between these two is will being competent in asserting your control in a violent, forceful way make for the better leader? Or will the guy who can kind of is more empathetic, maybe who tries to balance these things, will he make the better leader? What's so interesting, well, I'm kind of congratulating myself, but what is interesting is where we stopped at the end of chapter 4, that he's about to call a meeting. And we don't know if those kids are going to come to the meeting anymore. We don't know if they follow the rules and the authority of the conch. And so we're on this kind of cliffhanger about Ralph's leadership. Yeah.
I also think for Jack, we know that he's had experience leading someone before.
Yeah, all those choir kids listen to him.
Choir kids, but we don't know much about how Ralph has dealt with leadership.
Yeah.
So Jack is trying to gain that leadership from Ralph because he thinks he knows what he's doing more than he thinks Ralph knows what he's doing.
Yeah, so it's kind of, in some ways it's the election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. If Jack is Hillary Clinton because he has all this past experience, and Ralph is Donald Trump, I know personality-wise these don't line up, but if Ralph was Donald Trump, he has no experience. He's kind of this fresh face for leadership. They're kind of trying to decide here who's going to make the better leader, the person who has been a leader, but is kind of, they always use the word hawkish for Hillary Clinton. He's kind of like always sort of wants things her own way, you know, because she has that kind of background, because she has that expertise? Or do we go with the person that we think is actually, you know, going to be the one who considers all points of view more? Again, I'm not saying one political party or the other, but yeah, Allison.
Even with the like symbol of leadership with conch, Ralph has other characters like take it from.
Yes. Yeah, and Piggy is constantly picking it up and saying, I've got the conch, I've got the conch. So in some ways, Piggy is sort of vying for that leadership too, or at least sees the way that he gets power through
He just
Ralph.
wants his voice to be heard.
He does. Piggy it says it all the time. Like Piggy, like everybody is talking about who wants to be like chief and who wants to be leader and stuff. And Piggy is always just like, well, how about listening to me? As Piggy grudgingly raises his hand in the air. Like he's the, if we're thinking about that election, he's the Elizabeth Warren of the group. It's like always persisting, never listened to. All right, so keep this in mind because next time we're going to really solidify what leadership is, what authority is, what power is, what violence is, and its relationship to those things. So you are reading, it's a shorter section for next time. You're reading 5 and 6, chapter 5 and 6. Okay.
This is such an interesting book.
I can't wait till they start hearing each other.
You think they're going to?
Absolutely.
I think everything's gonna work out just fine. Well, did you notice there's a kid that already died? Or at least they think he did, the kid with the birthmark.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're just sort of like, well, let's just ignore that and move on, because that's hard to think about.
Right, well, he's gone. but
Yeah, well,
he just,
Yeah.
like, thinks about it for a minute, like, oh, you're like, where is that? He's like, well,